Good morning, everyone. It's 5:15. I think now it's 2 days before Friday the 13th, so it must be Wednesday the 11th of August 2021, and I'm back out on my search for the bridges of the three rivers of Rye. Still on the Rother. I think the last film I put out, we were at Newenden, and that was filmed several weeks ago. In actual fact, way back in early June, no, July, very early July. Since when, apart from me travelling on holiday, the weather has been lousy, absolutely lousy. And this is really the first morning I've had, even though it's midweek, and I don't particularly like coming out midweek, to film. And actually, it's probably a good morning to film, because I will be able to show you quite well what happens to the Rother here when it's been raining. I'm now standing on the Blackwall Bridge, and I'm right on the border between Kent and East Sussex again, and I think this camera has a little low light feature because it's appearing in the screen a lot brighter than it's appearing in real life, and you can see how the Rother has burst its banks, almost. But there's a story behind this. The history of the Rother gets very complicated, and so many ifs, buts, maybes, dates and what have you, but let's try and get into some kind of sense. At one time, this was an inlet of the sea, not the River Leman as it was at that time, which went round the north side, because as I move the camera this way, I'm facing the Isle of Oxney. This was an inlet of the sea rather than any kind of river, and the Leman went round the top end of Oxney and flowed out to the sea at New Romney, and then another little inlet of the sea came down the other side of Oxney. That's what made it an island. Then we had the great storm. Oh, there's a heron flying across there. Then we had the great storm of 1287, and the course of the Rother was diverted around the other side of Oxney, where there'd previously been a small channel, and all of that land silted up and is now what we know as Romney Marsh. Now, where are we? That's 1287, at which time it would appear that the powers that be decided that they didn't want the sea flowing into here, so they built various dams and that, and just eventually lessened the width here to just a drainage channel, basically, by building walls and sluices up at the other end of it, more towards where Rye is now. This is getting very complicated, but I'm standing actually at the bottom of a road called Mackerel Hill, and talking to various residents of Wittersham and the surrounding areas. The reason why it's called Mackerel Hill is because while this was still the sea, or a high tide inlet of the sea, there was apparently a fishing settlement here, and one of their main catches was mackerel, which used to chase the whitebait in on the high tides, apparently. I haven't been able to find any written evidence for that, to be honest with you. So there we have it. By the 1100s, 1200s, this was no longer a wide sea inlet. At high tide, yes, I think probably the sea would flow in, but this was mainly used and drained, ready to use for pastures and what have you. Where are we? This is getting very complicated, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying to explain it as best I can simply, but the history of the Rother is anything but simple. It was still called the Leman, we know this, until the 15th, 16th centuries, So around about the late 16th century, it was decided that the flow of the, we'll call it the Rother by then, should flow round the south side of Oxney. And so they dammed up the River Leman further along as we're looking, and they just reduced that end of the levels up there to drainage ditches, and got the land suitable for agricultural use. Here's always been a different kettle of fish altogether. They've used this almost as a catchment area for flooding. Now, there was another great storm apparently in 1636 when one of the dams further up burst, and I think the decision was taken by nature. The Rother started a huge flow down here and out towards Rye. So that was it. The course of the Rother was altered for good, and it hasn't changed since, basically. But in the 1960s, as I've spoken of before, we had that great flood. And over 60 square miles, something like that, was flooded. After that, we had these new floodworks. And what they've decided to do, the fields either side of the Rother here are actually used as water catchment areas in times of flooding, because quite simply down at what is now the Scots Float sluice, they don't let the high tide in up the Rother anymore because they don't want to mix salt and fresh water. So when that sluice gate is shut, everything is backed up here along the Rother. So the fields either side is used as water catchment areas, and there's a network of these pumping stations, as you see there. They use like Archimedes screw type pumps, which eventually will pump the water out of the drains that they've built into the fields and back into the Rother when the flow is suitable. But you can see where we've had all that rain in the last few days, the Rother's now almost burst its banks, and it won't take long before it goes over the top and we see the floods in the field. Indeed, up at Bodgham Station, that one of the fields there is quite well flooded. But I'm guessing that this bridge dates to probably the 1963, 64, something like that, after the floods. I do apologise, I'm probably boring the pants off you, but it really is difficult to try and fit the history of the Rother into into 3 or 4 minutes. But I'm very pleased that I've actually got out here this morning. You can begin to see the sun is on its way up. But everything is rather peaceful here this morning, and the flood banks are slightly higher this side, as you see, by comparison. And there along the bank you can see some of these little mini pumping stations as you look along there. Very, very peaceful, tranquil scene this morning. I saw a heron flying. I can hear the gulls. I think there's 1 or 2 more hens about. The birds are beginning to wake up. We may be a little bit early for that. But certainly the Rother here today is an awful lot wider than I would normally expect to find it. And that's actually worked out quite handy. Don't know about the origins of this bridge. Oh, I tell you what. I think I just heard a heron calling over there. Just gonna take a walk down here. This is the Blackwall South pumping station, and if you look through there you'll see how the water is collected into a drainage ditch from the fields, and then at a suitable time it's pumped up and out into the river. But as you can see, that's quite a modern bridge. The only thing I can assume is that some of the old bridges were swept away in the floods, or the authorities took the opportunity to build brand new. And noisy birds in the trees over there. Mind you, I'm not surprised. They're not used to people standing here doing silly things at this time of the morning. Don't know if you can hear that. You hear the sound of the water? You can see, if I raise that up, where the Archimedes screw type pump is bringing the water up from those levels. It's actually pumping some up now into the Rother, because obviously the level of the Rother isn't yet high enough to stop that happening. There's one or two fish, I think, out there beginning to just come up and bite this morning. Yeah, if you look at that line of foliage there marks where the Rother would normally be. So it's up over one bank and is now coming up over another one, but that, I pan this way, that there looks like, and it is concrete. They've made another wall. So you can definitely see that this is it's a managed area now. And as I walk back over the bridge from Sussex to Kent, you'll be able to hear the sounds of the countryside waking up. Rather chilly this morning. But anyway, there we are. Again, I do apologise. I haven't really explained the history of everything very well, have I? But it is so complicated. But hope I've managed to fit it all in while you've just been having a good look at the river here. Let's move on. I've moved eastwards now, and I'm standing on the new bridge. And I'm looking at the reflection in the water, I hope you can see it too, of the the vapour trails that are up in the sky. The sun is coming up, it's a lovely morning. But, it's just not quite high enough here so that you can see a really nice sunrise, but there it is. What we can see here though is this is definitely part of the navigable section of the Rother, the lowest 10 miles or so. But what a line up of boats there. Obviously not doing very much at the moment, but I've no doubt they'll all pretty soon be back up doing what it is they like to do. The county boundary's been moved very slightly here. It's just to the left of us as we look now, so the river now is wholly within East Sussex, and there you can see it. The levels are still way up even down here, but we're coming away from the managed levels now. Just a bit of mist in the corner there, and that is heading now down towards what we now know as the Royal Military Canal, which was built into that particular section of the Rother that had flowed round after the great storm had been diverted down that side of the Isle of Oxney and down towards Rye, and then over the years was, well, contained and altered and what have you, as I say, and then it wasn't a river anymore. But before it became the military canal, it was definitely navigable. After the military canal was built, it continued to be navigable. I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to the next bridge, which will be down at Iden. But I just want to come across the bridge here because I ain't going to go down there, but there's a pathway down there, you can see, which brings you down onto the kind of towpath. It probably is a nice walk along the riverbank when it's not flooded. But I'm pleased that the river is like this morning, because you can see now, oh, and there's another one of the pumping stations. There's about 20 of them along this particular bit. Very carefully managed flood protection measures, call them what you like. Unfortunately, the farmers' fields, I think, tend to suffer a little bit on occasions because of it, but I guess they get some compensation. And that practice actually goes back, way back to the 16th, 17th centuries, when the course of the river was finally diverted along here, and even previous to that, when it was even used then as a flood catchment area. Farmers were compensated for the months of the year when their land was flooded. Obviously it suited them quite well. But this is Newbridge, and it's on the road between Widdersham and Rye. Lovely morning. And again, I think this bridge probably dates from the 1960s when the floods caused all the damage. Lovely tranquil scene again.